Kush are. Does this make sense? So they are in a desert that does have a river kind of flowing through it, right? The Nile's going through it right here, right? And then you have the Nubian desert right here. But all the cities are similar to Egypt, going to be right off of the river.
Remember when we talked about Upper Egypt?
Yeah.
That's Nubia.
So, yeah.
When they would war over each other, Egypt, what is Egypt proper, Lower Egypt, Egypt proper. Nubia is what they conquered. They fought back and forth many times.
Right.
Did they ever like at all?
Yeah, so there was in like the Middle Kingdom, they merged into just fully Egypt, but this is kind of before that. We're going to be skipping through like a lot of 500 years of history or so. So, the Kingdom of Kush developed south of Egypt along the Nile. Can everyone see that, or is there a glare on the screen?
There's a glare.
Big time glare? Cool. Thank you, Coach O. So, why would civilizations develop along the Nile River?
Because of the resources that would grow from them.
Yeah, water, right? It's hard to grow crops in a desert. Yeah? Oh, perfect. Now we can see, yes? Is that better? Everyone can see? Fellas? Okay. So, Kush was in the region we call Nubia. Again, this is Nubia, right? Kerma is the biggest city at first, and then they establish Napata and later on Miro, right? So, every year, the Nile continues to flood and provide a rich layer of fertile soil, right? This is how you're able to survive, because otherwise you're in a desert, and that's not good. So farming villages thrived, and it's also rich in minerals like gold, copper, and stone. You're going to see this as a theme throughout Africa. There are minerals and natural resources abundant, and that's why later on European powers want to colonize the entire continent.
Because of the gold.
Because of all the resources, right? So if you control the resources, you control a lot. You can control trade, you can control warfare, things like that. Yeah, harvest for different crops, food that can be sent back, right? So there's a bunch of resources here.
Does anybody remember why copper was so important to the? That's what they made their weapons out of, unfortunately for them.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, copper saws is how they cut the limestone for the pyramids.
Which is crazy. I'm sure there's a lot of broken saws. So, like we said, Kush and Egypt were neighbors and trading partners. As you'll see throughout a lot of world history is the history of labor, right? It is a history of work. So the Kushites sent slaves to Egypt to do work, right? They also sent their minerals. Ivory is a big one, copper, stone, gold, like we talked about, right? Is this all? Do you know what I mean by like labor? Like people who do work, right?
Do they get paid?
No.
I mean, they get to live.
No.
That's kind of what
They get fed.
Yeah, they get fed and sometimes housed, right? So that is the history of the Kushites in Egypt. But obviously, as with all neighbors in this time, things are not always peaceful. Certain kings and pharaohs want land, right? And Egypt decided, hey, instead of you just sending us stuff, we will send you an army and take you over, right?
Just so you know, one of the things that Egypt and Kush are so important for, because the Kushites, just like the Egyptians, wrote everything down. They were very meticulous about that. When I told you last semester that the timelines are all messed up because we have all these dark periods that we don't know about, the reason they're coming around the conclusion that there were dynasties when they have in Karnak where they have all of the kings, list of the kings, they were listing kingdoms that were in competition with each other as opposed to this dynasty, this dynasty. That makes it make more sense. And we're realizing that intelligent civilization doesn't go as far back as what we think it does.
Right. Yep. And so around 1500 BCE, so about 3,500 years ago, Egyptian armies invaded and conquered most of Nubia, including all of Kush. So they come down here from Egypt, right, all the way down the Nile into Nubia, and they say, all of these farms, those are ours now. That gold is mine, right? So they're taking over Nubia, having a grand old time, and then they were in power for about 500 years, and that's when the Kushite leaders regained control, right? And then, about 700 years after, 250 years after that, Kush was once again as strong as it had been before, and the Kushites began to invade Egypt. So now they're fighting back just, a couple hundred years later, and they control the area from southern Nubia to the Nile Delta, right? And remember, the Nile Delta is this little area up here that feeds into the Mediterranean Sea. Does that make sense?
Okay, remember when I told you that the Egyptian headdress that they wore, the little thing that looked like it slid off and then the big cone thing in the middle? The Upper Kingdom was the big cone. Egypt was the whole thing, and they combined that in. The two rules, first of all, you have to understand, the native Egyptian people were Mediterranean looking, olive skin. The Nubians, what did they look like? Black. They were very black. That's why Egyptians, in the culture as far as Northern Africans, Egyptians are more dark complected because they and the Nubians have intermarried so much. Does that make sense? Because they were one culture about 45 times, as Mr. Brown's trying to tell you.
Yeah, these things are going back and forth, right? They're just trading times that they're ruling one another, right? And then finally in the 670s, the Kushites were driven out of Egypt by the Assyrians, who we've talked about in first semester, right? And the Assyrians were able to do this because they had more advanced weaponry, right? They had chariots, things like that.
What metal?
And
what metal did they have?
Iron. Iron will beat copper, right? It's a little stronger. You have iron tipped spears. You were going to cut through a copper shield pretty easily, right? So after being driven out of Egypt, the people of Kush devoted themselves to increasing agriculture and trade, and this is when the city of Miro was established. And this was a huge trading hub. Why? Well, resources. Again, right? You have gold. You have forests that have ebony and other wood. What's up? They love the resources, right? That's their favorite thing, especially gold. Gold is fancy, right? And it was here that the Kushites finally developed Africa's first iron industry. So they are in the Iron Age now. So they're finally making good weapons. They're finally being able to produce iron, right? They're off that copper stuff. So Miro, like we talked about, is going to be established on a river. Why is that?
Because where was everybody but Greece established?
On a river. In the floodplains, right?
Look at the topographical map in the little corner of Africa. If you go down far enough, what's the advantage of living in Nubia as opposed to Egypt? Look at the color of the map.
It's green. What does green mean?
Brendan, you're right? What does the green mean?
Money and not desert.
You get more lush jungle. You get more. Now, the bad thing is you have more predators, but you can hunt more. Now, look, up in Lower Egypt, could you get all away from the river very far? If you do, where are you? In the desert. Somebody said, yeah.
The Sahara. So yeah, they're closer to the more vegetated parts of Africa, right? Obviously down here you'll see the deeper jungles, but they still got some green around. And so Miro built a society, right? You have the pyramids, these little kind of mini pyramids that were used as like houses and other types of buildings, right? You had like baths, things like that. So those are the buildings. So there's obviously a lot of Egyptian influence, but there was a unique Kushite culture as well. They worship their own gods, plural. What does that mean? Polytheistic, that's right. And they developed their own written language that was separate from the Egyptian hieroglyphs, right?
Although you will see hieroglyphs down there because of the taking back and forth
Right.
of each other.
Yeah. What do we call that? That taking back and forth between cultures.
Diffusion.
Diffusion!
The big brain on West, he actually beat you.
There we go, folks. It all comes together. And women were expected to be very active in their society. And some women rose to positions of great authority, especially in religion, right? Women were very highly regarded in this way. And a few women ruled the empire alone. So that's progress. Now, not perfect, but progress. So they reached their height in the 1st century BCE, right? Remember, we're counting down in 4 Common Era. And eventually fell due to both external and internal factors. Iron and other metals ran out. Why did they run out? That is a good question. Why do you think that? How would these things have run out?
They used too much of it.
They used too much of it, right? They overmined the area. There was no more left that they could get to because they couldn't dig deep enough, right?
They grow back.
Well, and, okay, think of which way the river flows. Downstream, where can they get to? The Mediterranean, right? They weren't using all the ore, they were shipping it off and just making money off it.
They were doing a lot of trade. But yeah, natural resources, right, are a limited quantity, most of them. Does that make sense? So now we face kind of like oil or those kind of shortages sometimes. And then the overgrazing of cattle as well causes a deterioration of farmland. If you don't give the land a chance to grow back, right? That's why a lot of farmers will rotate crops, because if you grow the same crop over and over again, it ruins the soil and you're not able to grow things, right? So that's kind of what happened with the decline of the ancient Kush. We got that?
Yeah.
Everyone all good? We're having a good time? We remember, right? So for Kush, we're talking about below Egypt, or the south of Egypt, right? Right in this area, right off the desert. Now we are going to go all the way to the other side of the continent.
South Africa.
Oh, okay, you guys, you don't have to pull it back up, but, okay, did you guys see that little pyramid that was the background?
Yeah.
Nubians actually developed that. The Egyptians realized they built these huge pyramids that people could get into and steal stuff. And the Nubians, like, if you want to protect what you want to be buried with, what they would do is they would bury you, put a vault, and then build that pyramid up on top of it. And then the front outside, the front part with a little temple off of it, they put a statue of you, but they couldn't get to any of your goodies. So it was much more well covered. The tombs stayed around a lot longer and they actually survived.
Right.
Now, they mummified just like the Egyptians. So they actually outsmarted the Egyptians, and actually those start getting built in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom.
Correct. So, like we said, right, the Kushites are over here on the eastern side of the continent, and now we're going over to the western side of the continent. So based on just this kind of basic map, what factors do you think would have shaped the culture of West Africa?
Trade rivers.
Rivers, okay. Brother, you said trade?
Yeah.
Why trade?
It looks like a lot of trade routes on the picture.
Yep. Right. A lot of routes. What else? There's a big, huge thing in the desert, right?
Yeah.
The desert. So you're going to be kind of protected from the north by the Sahara, but you're also not going to be really able to grow a lot of things once you're by a river, right? And you also have these guys, these camels down here, to help you cross the desert.
When you see those trade paths, every time they intersect, what do you think is out in the middle of the desert that they're intersecting at? What? What did we talk about? How do you make it through the desert? There's certain little things along the way.
Water.
We just said that.
Oases, Christy.
Oasis.
So, West Africa was shaped by the Trans-Saharan Trade Network, right? So when you hear the word Trans-Saharan, that means across the Sahara. Does that make sense?
That is a very hard road to travel. You are traveling by camel, and why is your camel your mode of transportation?
They didn't have water.
They can go days without water.
Horses need a lot of water. Camels do not. So West Africa had large deposits of gold. You're not going to believe this. This whole society was built around resources.
Is it still there?
Huh?
Is it still there?
I don't know. You have to go find out. But they did not have salt, so they traded for salt. Thank you. Appreciate it. Traded salt for gold, or gold for salt. Next connected North and West Africa, right? So North Africa, you have Tripoli, you have Cairo, going all the way down into Timbuktu, right?
Why was salt important back then? Preservative for food.
Preservatives. Why was gold important?
That's
Because
money.
it's gold.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Shiny and pretty.
like we said, they used camel to get around, right? They had big networks of camels that they would ride around on through the desert. And
When's Ilda's appointment?
I don't know. You have to look on there.
You should have an email.
The gold salt trade increased what, Danny?
Trade route.
And something else that's on the screen.
Religion.
And something else that's on the screen if you can read.
Islam. Culture diffusion.
Cultural diffusion.
Bless you, missed it, man. You were there
Oh,
before.
I'm sorry. So, do you think that that might be an important concept to think about? Yeah, it is, right? So Islam was introduced to West Africa and slowly gained converts, right? We kind of touched on this in the last few lessons, right? Islam spread all throughout North Africa, and eventually that's going to spread down through the trade routes because everyone's talking to each other saying, hey, there's this new religion, just one God, right? And so slowly Islam gained converts, but it was not just Islam. Like they blended it with animism. By that name, can you guys tell me what you think animism might mean?
It was pregnant.
Huh?
Like the mother to animals.
It's kind of. Not just animals, though. It's any sort of inanimate object that they would give kind of living qualities to, right? So like a plant, I guess plants aren't really living, but so like plants, right? Rocks, things like that, they would give these qualities to and worship in these ways, right? So it's a blend of religions now. We're getting all kinds of weird stuff going on. So they either blended it with animism or they never converted. And this trade led to wealth and empires. So by 800, Ghana became an empire by taxing merchants. And when you get a lot of money, you can afford what?
Better
Huh?
things. Better things.
Better things like,
Resources. Iron.
like, what would you want if you're an empire and you have to protect what you have?
Weapons.
Army.
Army! Thank you, Braylon. So they had an army, and then they said, well, we have a really good army, and no one else around us does. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go take over, right? So they conquered the surrounding areas. So Ghana, the area that we're talking about, is kind of right here, but they kind of conquered out into the Niger River, right, into Djenné and all these other surrounding places. Ghana kings served as religious leaders, judges, generals, right? So they were at a little bit of everything. Does that make sense? Any questions? Everyone knows it all perfectly now? More questions? Yeah. Okay. And eventually Ghana was overthrown because these things happen over the course of hundreds of years, right? The Mali Empire emerges. And the Mali king Sundiata took over the Ghana kingdom and trade cities. And this guy created an efficient government and promoted farming, right? So again, we're going to be farming. We're going to be mining resources. We're going to be trading those resources for gold. And then we're going to be using that gold to pay our armies. Because if we don't, what is the army going to do? Overthrow us, right? So we got to make sure they're paid. So Sundiata takes over, right? Very rich man. This is around 1400.
That's a man.
It is. Well, it's a drawing. It's not a picture. They didn't have cameras yet. So, the kings who ruled Mali after Sundiata converted to Islam. Huh?
Mansa Musa.
Mansa Musa. What do you know about Mansa Musa, Braylon?
Richest man.
Richest man ever? Is that what you've heard?
Never.
He what? He did. He built a 100,000 man army, right, to control Mali.
And then he also divided Mali into provinces.
Oh, wow. So smart, guys. You can read.
Hey,
So true.
if Mansa Musa were alive today, his wealth would be estimated, he would be a trillionaire.
That's all what he did.
No, I'm not related to him.
What?
That's all what he did. Instead of
Yeah, except you're close to
He'd be at least 6'11".
6'11"?
So if you give him the drama,
So,
No, I'm 6'11".
Mansa Musa, right, built a huge army, decided to divide Mali into provinces. Huh? Oh. So you guys remember the viziers that we talked about a couple units ago, right? The governors that kind of ruled. Same kind of system here, right? You're dividing into provinces and ruling by appointed governors. Kind of similar things that we have in the United States, right? You have a governor of Missouri that just handles Missouri affairs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're trying to make things more efficient. You're trying to kind of delegate the work. You don't want to do everything yourself, right? So Mansa Musa was a devout Muslim and went on a Hajj. What's a Hajj?
A pilgrimage.
A pilgrimage, correct. A pilgrimage. He went to Mecca in 1324. As you can see by his route, he went through the Sahara. Was this an easy trip? Can he hop in his car and just drive there? Can he hop on the plane, on the private jet? No. He is not hopping on the private jet. He's got the private camel, right? So he gets on the private camel, he goes to Mecca, and on the way there, he is passing out gold nuggets to people who he met. This man has money, right? So why would he be doing this?
too much money.
friends and connections.
You got too much money.
Correct, Braylon, to make friends and connections, right? If people hear about this guy just passing out gold nuggets, they're going to be like, well, I want some of that. Let's go make friends with Mansa Musa, right? They probably didn't. If you bit into him, you'd probably break your teeth. So
Actually, gold is softer than black stone.
Ain't that soft?
it's not soft enough to bite into.
Don't. Oh, what's it? Don't.
So,
Okay, I want you to stop and think about it. How many of you have ever lost like a gold bracelet and your parents just gone nuts on you? Because it was not cheap, right?
My brother did.
I want you to imagine throwing away nuggets. Just throwing them out like they're candy bars.
Almost worth like.
What kind of money is that?
Like 20 grand.
so this is a European map of Africa, right? This one right here. It's hard to tell. This is kind of the Mediterranean right here, right? This is northern Africa. The scaling's a little bit off because it's an old map. Cartography, not really a huge thing. And based on this map, you see they have Mansa Musa right here. What do you think the Europeans knew about Mansa Musa?
Yeah,
That he was rich. What gives that away?
All handed out the gold.
But what, based on this map?
on his crown, the staff.
He's got gold, right? He's got all gold everything. So,
Guess what happens shortly after this?
Europeans came over.
Europeans start colonizing Africa.
What's this going on like during the dark
And then
ages?
unfortunately,
Yeah,
what
it's like
happens after
1300s.
that,
He gets killed.
slave trade.
Oh,
Yeah,
dark times.
real dark times. Real bad, right? So he returns from Mecca. When he went to Mecca, what was that called?
Pilgrimage.
Yeah, what's the other
What's
word
the
for
word?
it?
Hajj.
Hajj. That's right. So he returns from the Hajj to Mecca, and he builds mosques all throughout Mali, including in Timbuktu, right? And this is a huge trade city, attracted scholars, doctors, religious leaders, had a university, which was a huge center for learning, right? And since he's attracting all these people from all around the world, what do you think's going on? Yeah, cultural diffusion. We're catching on, folks. Good job. So, Timbuktu. This is the mosque in Djenné, right?
Made out of sand.
Like clay and other things, right? Like wet sand. I mean, there's not a whole lot of like in Egypt, you had like limestone and things like that, right? And so they're using the resources and architectural techniques available to them, right? It gives them kind of a unique flair that.
No different than the Eastern, like Mesopotamians, they were built on mud bricks.
Yep. This was the university. It doesn't really look like an American university, does it? You're not seeing kind of the huge pillars that you might see like a Mizzou or something like that. But a lot of learning, a lot of scholars from around the way coming through. So after Mansa Musa, the Mali Empire declined, right? He was kind of a lone figure atop history, if you will, and was replaced by the Songhai. And so these were kings who gained control of trade cities along the gold salt routes, and this grew into the largest of the West African empires. So if you'll see, we go back here, right? This is the Mali Empire, right? This is the original Ghana Empire. This yellow circle right here, right? So not a huge empire yet, right? And then the Mali Empire comes through. They expand all the way to the coast. Why would they want to expand to the coast? Trade, right? It's near the ocean. It's a lot easier to access other parts of the world, right? Instead of having to go through the Sahara to get to Europe, you can now just take a ship all the way around.
And when you went across family lands, they paid taxes.
Right. So they expanded to there. They expanded further into the middle of Africa, and then you get to the Songhai, you get all the way up here into kind of the middle of the Sahara, all the way down here, right, over the Niger River. So you're expanding to quite a huge empire. And then it fell in 1591, and that ended 1,000 years of empires in West Africa, right? The most important, go ahead.
Just when you get to be an American History or Junior, I want you to remember this because these huge, culturally significant empires with great centers of learning like Timbuktu, this is the area where most of the slaves are going to come from in the American slave trade, and they're calling these people not enlightened individuals. What are they calling them? Savages. That they're not intelligent, so they don't deserve to be treated like human beings.
Do you think that was true, or was that some propaganda put out by Europeans to justify slavery?
True. No, we're in a propaganda.
Are you just going to say the opposite of what Braylon said, just in case? So, African societies were transformed by, what is it always? Two things, right? Trade and religion. So they had trade with outsiders, the introduction of Islam, right? You'll see these trade routes are connecting them with the rest of the world, leading to. Yeah, there we go. We're so good at this. Good night. All right. I know we're blowing through these, but we've lost a few days, so. That is the kingdoms of West Africa. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Cool. We will now, what are we going to do now? Do we have, what time is it? Oh, we got so much time. What we will start on now is, oops. No, we will not start on that. We will go through the trading states of East Africa. So we were just in West Africa, and now we're going back to East Africa, right? We're having fun. So, over the course of 4,000 years, Bantu peoples of Central Africa migrated south in search of farmland, right? So before, we start out in Egypt, which is not even on this map, right? That's up here by the Mediterranean. Then we go down into Nubia. Then we go all the way across over here into Ghana, right? And now we're heading south into the Congo. And then down into, South Africa, right? So these migrations help spread new farming and ironworking techniques, right? So then, looking at this map, what factors do you think shaped the culture of East and South Africa? There's a few things here.
The ocean.
The ocean is one. What do you think another one is? That's what happens eventually. Trade, yep, right? You're trading. And again, when you're this close to the ocean, you can go into Arabia just right there instead of having to travel through these like more mountainous regions, right? Does that make sense? And what was this called again? The Arabian Peninsula? Why is it called peninsula? Three bodies of water, right? Exactly. And then this down here, Madagascar. What is that? Island. And a movie, yeah. A series of movies that got worse as time goes on.
Started out great.
Yeah, straight to the ground, right? There is one other thing that is going to be important to know, and it's the same thing every single time. What are they going to have a lot of?
All the shirt.
A lot of gold. What else?
Silver.
Trade. Ocean.
Iron.
Ivory, right? Iron. They also had leopard skins, right?
Oh, that's cool.
Resources. It's all about resources, isn't it?
They got cheetah.
Who controls them? Who can trade with them? So, the societies of East Africa participated in the Indian Ocean Trade Network and were shaped by what, Brendan? Cultural diffusion. What does that mean?
Yeah, Brendan.
Spread. They spread the culture.
The spread and mix of cultures, right? Good job. So, the Kingdom of Aksum, which is right here, traded with Persia, India, Arabia, and Rome, right? So remember, India is right here. Just a real quick jump across the Arabian Sea. You can also pretty easily get to Persia up here, right? So it's a very, very ideal location for trade. And funnily enough, Aksum became a Christian kingdom. How did that happen?
Rome.
Trade with Rome is a big part of it, right? So when you have trade networks, you sometimes adopt the religion of those trade networks, right? So there was a lot of Christianity being traded down as well. So this is what an Aksum church would look like, right? Very interesting architecture.
I like it.
That's what you mean.
Kind of underground
Okay,
too.
you see all the ground all around it? Now, when things get covered up by dust over time, the building was completely covered. They had to dig down that far to get to it.
That's what archaeologists do, right?
They have like an upstairs.
Huh?
They have like an upper level.
Yeah, with the building materials, that is pretty impressive because
Mm-hmm.
that would collapse pretty easily if you didn't know what you're doing.
Yep.
Is it bigger on the inside?
What do you mean?
It looks
Looks
like
pretty
a
small
city.
outside. Looks like an average house.
Yeah.
That does not look it.
It's pretty big, I'd say.
We see in person.
So, Arab merchants introduced Islam to these cities, right? And the mix of African and Arab cultures led to a new Swahili language, and that is still used today. Towns had mosques and were ruled by a Muslim sultan, but many people kept their traditional religious beliefs. A lot of those would be polytheistic, right? A lot of people at this time are worshiping multiple gods. They see God in a lot of different things, or see different gods as, using different for different purposes, right? And keep in mind still, India's right there, right? There is a religion there that believes in multiple gods, right?
Hindu.
Exactly. So you're getting all sorts of different religions going on in East Africa, right? And that, I think, might do it for today. Because that was a lot. Sound good?
Are your brains all full?
Yeah.
Yes.